The Thing by the Fire. I've never liked camping alone, but that weekend I felt like I needed to get away from everything. Work, people, noise, it was all crushing me. So when my friends bailed at the last second, I stubbornly decided to go anyway. The drive into the national park was calm enough, but once I left the marked trail and hiked a few miles into the trees, the silence was overwhelming. Normally, the woods are alive with sounds, birds, insects, even the occasional rustle of small animals. Out there, though, it felt like the forest was holding its breath. I found a small clearing where the trees bent inwards like crooked ribs. It wasn't exactly welcoming, but I was tired, so I set up my tent, started a small fire, and tried to convince myself it was fine. As the sun set, the temperature dropped quickly, and the shadows stretched long and sharp across the ground. By nightfall, the fire was the only thing pushing back the dark. I sat close to it, poking at the flames with a stick, telling myself I wasn't nervous. But every time the fire cracked, I caught myself flinching, glancing over my shoulder at the black wall of trees. Around midnight, just when my eyelids were getting heavy, I heard it. Twigs snapping somewhere in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a deer, maybe a raccoon. But the sound didn't fade. It moved, deliberate, steady, circling me. "Hello," I called, though my throat was dry. My voice felt too small for the woods. The sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was so complete, it made my ears ring. I held my breath and waited, gripping my flashlight tight in my hand. After a few moments, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Then I saw it. Something shifted just beyond the tree line. At first, it looked human, but the proportions were wrong. Too tall, too thin, its arms too long. I swung my flashlight toward it, but the beam only caught empty trees. My stomach dropped. When I turned back toward the fire, it was standing right there, on the edge of the light, watching me. Its face was pale, stretched too tight over its skull, with a grin that seemed carved into its skin. No sound, no breath, no movement, just that grin. The firelight flickered across its body, and I realized its chest wasn't rising and falling. It tilted its head, bird-like, as if studying me. I couldn't move. My body locked up in terror. Then, without a sound, it stepped backward into the dark. One blink, and it was gone. I didn't sleep. I kept the fire burning as high as I could, feeding it everything I had. Every time the flames snapped or shifted, I thought I saw that face flicker in the shadows. By morning, my nerves were raw. I tore down my tent in minutes, shoving everything into my pack and leaving breakfast behind. I didn't even stop to catch my breath until I saw my car. When I got home, I threw my backpack down and unzipped it. My stomach turned cold. Inside, on top of my gear, was a handful of wet, blackened ash. The kind that only comes from a dying fire. The thing had been close enough to take from it. I never camped alone again. Whispers in the Pines. I reached the campsite late in the afternoon, the sun already sinking behind the jagged treetops. The forest was dense, the kind that swallows sound. Even the wind seemed to die when I stepped deeper into the pines. I found a small clearing just wide enough to pitch my tent and build a fire, and as I set everything up, a prickling unease settled over me. It felt like the woods were watching. When night fell, the fire was the only light for miles. Its glow barely pushed back the shadows, and beyond the reach of the flames, the trees seemed to press in closer. I told myself I was just tired, but then I heard it. A sound, soft, distant, a whisper. I froze, holding my breath. It could have been the wind. I wanted it to be the wind. But then it came again, low and deliberate, almost like words too quiet to understand. I spun around, scanning the tree line, but there was nothing. Just dark trunks and branches swaying gently in the night. I tried to focus on the fire, on boiling water for coffee, but the whispers didn't stop. They circled me, sometimes behind, sometimes off to the side, as if someone was moving through the trees just out of sight. The longer I listened, the more certain I became that they weren't random sounds. They were voices. More than one. My hands shook as I lifted the flashlight, the beam cutting through the dark. That's when I saw it. Between the trees, just beyond the edge of the light, a figure stood. Tall, motionless, its face was hidden in shadow, but I knew, without any reason to know, that it was staring directly at me. The whispers stopped. For a long moment, silence pressed in on me so hard it felt like my ears might burst. Then the figure's head tilted, unnaturally slow, as if it were curious. My throat went dry and I couldn't breathe. I blinked once, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat inside my tent with the flashlight clutched in my hand, flinching at every crunch of leaves, every creak of branches. More than once I swore I saw a shadow pass across the thin fabric of the tent. And just before dawn, I felt it, something pressing against the canvas from the outside. A hand. When daylight finally broke, I stumbled out, shaking. The fire was long dead, and the forest looked ordinary again, like nothing had happened. But then I saw the ground around my tent. Circles, footprints in the dirt, dozens of them, not mine, and all of them were facing inward, toward me. The thing in the woods. I had been planning this solo camping trip for weeks. The stress of work, the endless noise of the city, it all made me crave silence, fresh air, and the feeling of being completely alone with nature. By the time I parked my car at the edge of the trail and hiked a few miles into the forest, I already felt lighter. The trees towered above me like guardians, and the further I went, the more the outside world seemed to dissolve. I found a clearing by a small creek just before dusk. It was perfect, flat ground for the tent, water nearby, and the soft rustle of pine needles in the breeze. I set up camp, built a fire, and sat back against a log as the sky deepened into shades of blue and black. It was exactly what I needed. But peace doesn't last long when you're paying attention. It started with small sounds, a branch snapping too cleanly, like it wasn't just falling but being stepped on. A faint rustle in the brush that didn't match the breeze. I told myself it was wildlife, a deer, maybe even a raccoon. Forests are alive with things moving. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sounds were measured, almost like footsteps. I tried to ignore it, poking at the fire until sparks leapt into the dark. The flames painted the trees in a flickering orange glow, but the spaces between them were absolute black. I caught myself staring into those gaps too long, imagining shapes that weren't there. Or maybe they were. At one point I thought I heard whispering, soft, low, like voices carried through the branches. I held still, straining to listen, but every time I leaned in, the whispers stopped. Then the forest would fall completely silent. No crickets, no wind, nothing. That silence was worse than any noise. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. Later, when I finally crawled into my tent, I kept the flashlight beside me. Sleep came in fits, broken by the constant sense that something was outside. At first, it was faint, the crunch of pine needles, distant, then closer, walking, circling. I pressed my ear against the thin fabric of the tent, heart hammering. The footsteps stopped right beside me, just inches away. Then came the sound that still freezes me even as I remember it now, a slow drag of fingernails across the tent wall. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. The scratching traveled from one side of the tent to the other, deliberate and unhurried. When it stopped, I thought maybe it was gone, until the fabric bulged inward as if a hand pressed against it. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. I stayed like that the entire night, flashlight clutched in my hand, waiting for something to tear its way inside. When the gray light of dawn finally bled through the trees, I stumbled out of the tent, exhausted and shaking. The forest looked ordinary again, almost calm. But then I saw them, footprints, all around my tent. Too many to count, circling again and again, pressed deep into the soil. And they weren't boot prints or animal tracks. They were bare feet, dozens of them, and every single one faced inward, toward me.